I've never been good at these kinds of events. You know the type, where everyone stands around with drinks in their hands, pretending to be interested in small talk while secretly checking their phones every few minutes. That's exactly where I found myself on a rainy Thursday evening in March, stuck at a networking event my company insisted I attend. The hotel conference center was packed with people I didn't know, all dressed in business casual and wearing those fake smiles that come with forced socializing. I positioned myself near the refreshment table, thinking at least I'd have something to do with my hands. A glass of sparkling water became my safety blanket as I checked my watch for what felt like the 100th time. Just 30 more minutes, I told myself. Then I could leave without looking rude. I was scrolling through my phone, reading absolutely nothing, when someone bumped into me from behind. My drink nearly went flying, and I spun around, ready to be annoyed. But then I saw her. She was apologizing before I could even process what happened. Her hazel eyes were bright with embarrassment, and she had this laugh that somehow cut through all the background noise in the room. It wasn't a polite little giggle either. It was genuine, the kind of laugh that makes other people want to laugh too. "I'm so sorry," she said, still smiling. I was trying to avoid someone and wasn't watching where I was going. I found myself smiling back, which was weird because I'd been in a bad mood all evening. "No problem. At least we both survived with our drinks intact," she introduced herself. Her name was Victoria, and she was visiting from the Chicago office for some quarterly review thing. I recognized her name immediately. We'd been working together remotely for months, exchanging emails about digital architecture projects, but we'd never actually met in person. "Wait, you're the one who always sends those detailed reports at exactly 9 in the morning?" she asked, her eyes lighting up with recognition. "Guilty," I admitted. "And you're the one who leaves comments in the margins that actually make me laugh." What happened next surprised me. We started talking, really talking, not the surface-level stuff people do at these events. She told me about growing up in a small town in Illinois, how she never thought she'd end up in the tech industry. I found myself sharing things too. Stories about my work, my frustrations, even my terrible attempts at learning guitar during lockdown. Time did that weird thing where it speeds up when you're not paying attention. The crowd started thinning out, people heading toward the exits in small groups. I realized I'd completely forgotten about my escape plan. "Want to grab some coffee?" Victoria suggested. "There's a quieter spot over by those windows." We moved away from the main crowd to a corner with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights. It was quieter there, more intimate somehow. The conversation shifted from work to personal interests. Turns out we both loved jazz music, the kind most people our age had never even heard of. We'd both read the same obscure science fiction novels. We even had the same favorite hiking trail, though we'd never been there at the same time. It felt easy talking to her, natural in a way that made me forget I usually hated these kinds of interactions. Around 10:45, I was in the middle of telling her about this amazing hiking spot I discovered last summer, when she did something completely unexpected. She leaned in close, really close, close enough that I caught the scent of her perfume, something subtle with hints of vanilla and maybe cedar. My words died in my throat. For a second, I thought maybe I'd misread the situation, that this was turning into something else entirely, but then she whispered, and what she said had nothing to do with what I was thinking. Her voice was barely audible, meant only for me to hear. "I know something about you that could change everything. Meet me at the Riverside Cafe tomorrow at noon if you want to know what it is." I froze. Actually froze like my brain had just short-circuited and forgot how to make my body function. Victoria pulled back, and there was this knowing smile on her face, like she'd just shared the world's biggest secret and was enjoying watching me try to process it. She gathered her belongings, her coat, her bag, moving with this calm confidence that felt almost surreal given what she'd just said. I stood there like a statue, unable to form words, unable to do anything except watch her walk toward the exit. At the door, she paused, looked back over her shoulder. Our eyes met across the room, and then she was gone, disappearing into the night. I don't know how long I stood there. Could have been seconds, could have been minutes. Other people were leaving around me, probably thinking I was just some weirdo staring at nothing. My mind was racing, replaying those whispered words over and over like a broken record. What could she possibly know about me? We'd only just met in person. Our entire relationship had been professional emails and the occasional video call about work projects. There was nothing in my life that someone like her could know that would change everything. unless there was. I mechanically gathered my things, my coat, my phone, my keys, moving on autopilot through the motions of leaving. The taxi ride home was a blur. I stared out the window at the rain streaking down the glass, the city lights turning into watercolor smears, but I wasn't really seeing any of it. My mind kept circling back to the same questions. What did she know? How did she know it? Was this some kind of joke? But her face had been serious when she whispered those words. There was no hint of teasing, no suggestion that this was anything other than completely real. The anticipation was killing me. Not the good kind either. Not like waiting for a surprise party or a vacation. This was the kind that makes your stomach twist and your hands shake. The kind that whispers danger and possibility in equal measure. I tried to convince myself not to go tomorrow. It could be anything. A prank, a misunderstanding. Maybe she had me confused with someone else. But even as I thought these things, I knew I'd be there. How could I not? How do you ignore something like that? By the time I got home to my apartment, it was past midnight, but I was wide awake. Sleep felt impossible. I paced around my living room, picked up my phone a dozen times, put it back down without doing anything. Made tea I didn't drink, turned on the TV and stared at it without processing a single image. Around 2 in the morning, I gave in and looked her up online. Her professional profile showed everything she'd told me was true. An impressive career, steady progression through increasingly important roles, education from good schools. Nothing there suggested she was the type to play games or make things up. I scrolled through our email history, months of professional exchanges. Always polite, always focused on work. There was nothing personal in any of it, nothing that would explain how she could know something important about me. Dawn came too slowly and too fast at the same time. I called in sick to work, something I almost never did. Told them I had a stomach bug. It wasn't entirely a lie. My stomach had been in knots since last night. I changed clothes 3 times before settling on something casual but presentable. Jeans, a button-down shirt, nothing too formal but not sloppy either. Left my apartment way too early and ended up sitting in my car near the cafe for 20 minutes before going in. The Riverside Cafe was one of those trendy places with exposed brick walls and plants hanging from the ceiling. I ordered coffee I knew I wouldn't drink and found a table by the window. Checked my watch. 11:45. 15 minutes early. Those 15 minutes felt like hours. Every time the door opened, my heart jumped. But it was always someone else. Just regular people getting their coffee and going about their normal lives. Nobody whose life was about to get turned upside down by information they didn't know existed. At exactly noon, she walked in. Victoria looked different in daylight, more real somehow. She was dressed casually, jeans and a leather jacket, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She saw me immediately, gave a small wave and went to the counter to order her coffee. I watched her go through the motions, wondering if she was drawing out the suspense on purpose. She took her time, added cream and sugar, stirred it slowly. When she finally walked over to my table, my hands were shaking slightly. She sat down across from me, set her coffee on the table, and smiled. It was a warm smile, genuine, but there was something else in her eyes. Sympathy, maybe? Or concern? "I'm glad you came," she said simply. I couldn't find words. My mouth felt dry despite the coffee sitting in front of me. Victoria took a sip of her drink and I realized she was giving me time to collect myself. But before either of us could say anything else, my phone started buzzing on the table. The name on the screen made my stomach drop. Daniel, my brother. Daniel never called during the day. Never. He was a high school teacher, always in class or dealing with students. For him to call now meant something was wrong. I looked up at Victoria and her expression had changed. She was staring at my phone screen and something in her face shifted. Recognition, maybe. Or confirmation of something she already knew. "You should take that," she said quietly. "It's related to what I need to tell you." My hand trembled as I picked up the phone. I stepped outside into the cool air, pressed the phone to my ear and heard my brother's voice, stressed in a way I hadn't heard in years. "Hey, listen, I know this is out of the blue," Daniel said, talking fast, "but some stuff has come up with Dad's estate. Documents that have surfaced. We need to talk in person. Can you come home this weekend?" "What kind of documents?" I managed to ask, not over the phone. "This weekend, okay? It's important." The call ended before I could ask anything else. I stood there on the sidewalk, people walking past me, cars driving by, the whole world continuing like normal, while mine felt like it was tilting sideways. When I went back inside, Victoria was waiting patiently. I sat down and she gave me a moment before speaking. "Your father," she began softly. "He passed away 5 years ago, right?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "My mother worked as a paralegal at the law firm that handled his estate," Victoria continued. 3 weeks ago, she was organizing old files, cleaning out storage, and she found a sealed envelope. It had your father's name on it, marked as personal correspondence that was supposed to be delivered after a certain amount of time had passed. She paused, watching my face carefully. I felt like I was holding my breath, waiting for whatever bomb was about to drop. The envelope contained letters. Letters your father wrote during the last year of his life. My mother read them, felt they were too important to stay buried in a filing cabinet. When she saw I worked with you remotely, she asked me to tell you in person. She thought that would be better than a phone call or an official letter. "Tell me what?" The words came out barely above a whisper. Victoria reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. She handled it carefully, like it contained something fragile. "These are copies. The originals have already been sent to your brother through official channels. That's why he called you." She slid the folder across the table. I stared at it like it might bite me. "Your father," Victoria said gently, "wrote about a secret he kept for most of his life. Before he married your mother, he was in a relationship with another woman. That relationship produced a daughter. You have a half-sister you never knew about." The cafe sounds faded into white noise. I could see Victoria's lips moving, but for a moment I couldn't process the words. "A sister? How was that possible?" My father had been the most straightforward man I knew. No secrets, no hidden past, just a regular guy who worked hard, loved his family, and died too young from cancer. "I don't understand," I finally said. Victoria's expression was sympathetic. "Your father maintained contact with this woman for years, but she asked him not to tell anyone about their daughter. She wanted to raise her child without complications, without splitting the girl's attention between two families. Your father agreed. He supported them financially, but from a distance." She pushed the folder closer to me. "It's all in the letters. He wrote about his regrets, about wishing things could have been different. He wanted you and your brother to eventually know, to have the chance to meet your sister. But he struggled with when the right time would be, and then his illness got worse and time ran out." I opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside were photocopies of handwritten letters, my father's distinctive messy scrawl covering page after page. There were also legal documents, birth certificates, photographs. One photo showed a baby, maybe 6 months old, with dark curly hair. Another showed a young woman, probably in her 20s, standing on a beach somewhere. She had my father's eyes. Actually, she had my eyes. The resemblance was unmistakable. "Her name is Rebecca," Victoria said softly. "Rebecca Brennan. She's 38, 2 years older than your brother. She grew up knowing about you and Daniel, but her mother asked her never to reach out. She respected that wish." I looked up from the photos. "Does she know?" "That we know now?" "Your brother contacted her last week through the law firm. She knows. She's willing to meet, but she wants to take it slow." "This is overwhelming for everyone." Victoria was right. Overwhelming didn't even begin to cover it. My entire understanding of my family history had just been rewritten. The father I thought I knew had kept this massive secret for decades. I had a sister, a whole person who shared my blood, who'd been living her life completely separate from mine. "Why didn't he ever tell us?" I asked, my voice cracking slightly. "He explains it in the letters," Victoria said. "He made a promise to Rebecca's mother, and he was a man who kept his promises. He thought he was doing the right thing, protecting everyone. By the time Rebecca's mother passed away 2 years ago, and that promise was technically void, your father was already very sick. He was trying to figure out how to tell you when he died." I sat there staring at the photos, the letters, trying to make sense of it all. Part of me was angry. How could he keep something like this from us? But another part understood. Life gets complicated. People make choices they think are best, and sometimes those choices create problems down the road. "I debated for 2 weeks whether to tell you," Victoria admitted. "I kept thinking maybe it wasn't my place, that the law firm should handle it officially. But my mother was insistent. She said you deserved to hear it from a person, not from legal documents." "Why you specifically?" "Because I'd been communicating with you for work. My mother thought it would be easier coming from someone you at least knew, even if we'd never met in person. And honestly, I understood what this meant. My father left our family when I was young. I know about family secrets and complicated relationships. I felt like I could at least deliver the news with some empathy. We sat in silence for a while. Other people came and went around us, living their normal lives, unaware that my entire world had just shifted on its axis. "The anticipation you must have felt last night," I said finally, "when you whispered that to me. You knew this would change everything." "I did," Victoria said, "and I'm sorry if I scared you. I just didn't know how else to do it." Blurting it out at a networking event seemed wrong, but I also couldn't just leave without saying anything. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw genuine concern in her face. She'd taken on this burden, this responsibility of delivering life-changing news to a virtual stranger because she thought it was the right thing to do. That took courage. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. "For telling me. For caring enough to do it in person." "There's one more thing," Victoria said, reaching into her bag again. She pulled out another envelope, smaller than the folder, sealed. This letter was separate from the others. "It's addressed specifically to you from your father. The law firm said you should read it yourself when you're ready." She handed me the envelope. My name was written on it in my father's handwriting. I ran my thumb over the letters, feeling the slight indentation of the pen marks. "I should probably go," Victoria said, standing up. "This is a lot to process, and you'll want time to think." "Wait," I said, looking up at her. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "That first night at the event before you whispered to me, were you nervous?" She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "Terrified. I almost chickened out 3 different times. But I kept thinking about what it would mean if nobody told you. How you'd feel if you found out years later that people knew and said nothing. That's what pushed me to do it." "Thank you," I said again. "Really. You have my number from work emails," she said. "If you need to talk or if you have questions, I'm here. This kind of thing shouldn't be processed alone." She left, and I sat there with the folder and the unopened letter, my coffee cold, the lunch rush starting to fill the cafe around me. I felt shaken, uncertain, but also strangely grateful. The whisper that had left me trembling with anticipation had delivered exactly what Victoria promised. Everything had changed. Now I just had to figure out what to do next. I drove to my mother's house that weekend with my father's unopened letter sitting in the passenger seat. Every time I stopped at a red light, I'd look at it, run through the possibilities of what it might say, then convince myself not to open it while driving. Daniel's car was already in the driveway when I pulled up. The house looked exactly the same as it always did. The same blue shutters, the same flower beds my mother carefully maintained. But knowing what I now knew, everything felt different, like I was seeing a familiar place through a stranger's eyes. Mom opened the door before I could knock. She looked tired, older somehow, with new lines around her eyes I didn't remember from my last visit. She hugged me without saying anything, just held on for a moment longer than usual. Daniel was in the living room, sitting on the same couch we'd grown up jumping on. He stood when I walked in, and we did that awkward half-hug thing brothers do when they're not sure how to act around each other. "So you know," he said. "It wasn't a question," Victoria told me, "from the law firm." Daniel nodded. "The firm sent me everything officially last week. I wanted to wait until we could all be together to talk about it. Mom made tea nobody drank. We sat in the living room where we'd spent countless family evenings watching movies, playing board games, being a normal family. Except apparently we hadn't been as normal as I thought. Did you know?" I asked Mom, not quite meeting her eyes. She was quiet for a long moment. "I found out a year ago. Daniel discovered some papers while handling the final estate details, and he told me. We've been trying to figure out how to tell you. Why didn't you just tell me right away?" "Because I was angry," Mom said simply. "I know I shouldn't have been. It happened before your father and I even met. But finding out that he kept this from me for our entire marriage, that he had this whole other connection I didn't know about, it hurt. I needed time to work through my feelings before I could talk about it calmly." I pulled out the envelope Victoria had given me. "Dad wrote me a personal letter. I haven't opened it yet." "Maybe you should," Daniel suggested. "Might help explain things." My hands were shaking slightly as I broke the seal. Inside were several pages in my father's handwriting, dated about 6 months before he died. I read it silently first, then out loud so everyone could hear. The letter explained everything. How he'd been in a relationship with a woman named Patricia in his early 20s, how they'd broken up but discovered months later that she was pregnant, how Patricia had been determined to raise the child on her own terms, without complications from a failed relationship. Dad had wanted to be involved, but Patricia had been firm. She'd allowed financial support but asked him to keep his distance otherwise. She didn't want their daughter growing up confused about family structures, being pulled between two homes. So he'd agreed. He'd sent money every month. He'd received occasional updates and photos. But he'd stayed away, honoring Patricia's wishes even though it killed him. When he met Mom a few years later and they got married, he'd struggled with whether to tell her. He'd convinced himself that since he wasn't actively involved in his daughter's life, it wasn't relevant. A mistake he regretted for years but never found the right moment to correct. The letter got harder to read toward the end. Dad wrote about his regrets, about how he'd wanted us to know our sister, but kept finding excuses to delay. He'd been scared of hurting people, of disrupting lives, of being seen as a liar and a failure. When he got sick, time became precious. Patricia had died by then, which meant his promise to her was technically ended. His daughter, Rebecca, was an adult who could make her own choices. He'd visited her once, apologized for being absent, explained everything. She'd been kind about it, understanding even, and they'd stayed in occasional contact. He'd wanted to tell us then, to bring the family together, but the cancer moved fast and his mind got foggy from treatments and he'd run out of time. The letters were his backup plan, his way of telling us the truth even after he was gone. The last paragraph hit me hard. I'm sorry for the secrets. I'm sorry for the lies of omission. But I'm not sorry Rebecca exists. She's a good person, and I hope someday you'll get to know her. She's your sister. That's not a mistake, even if everything else was. Please don't let my failures stop you from having a relationship with her. Family is built on love, not perfection. When I finished reading, the room was quiet. Mom was crying softly. Daniel was staring at his hands. I've been in touch with Rebecca, Daniel said after a while. Just emails so far. She seems nice. Cautious but nice. What did she say? I asked. That she's known about us her whole life. Her mom told her young. Didn't want it to be a secret between them. Rebecca said it was weird growing up knowing she had brothers she'd never met. She looked us up on social media over the years, watched our lives from a distance. That was a strange thought. Someone out there had been watching us, knowing we were connected while we lived our lives completely unaware. She wants to meet, Daniel continued. But she's nervous. This is complicated for everyone. Did Dad visit her? Before he died? I asked once, Mom said. About a year before he passed. He told me he had a work trip, but I found out later where he'd really gone. That's when he and Rebecca started emailing occasionally. She sent flowers to his funeral, but she didn't come. I didn't understand why at the time. What do we do now? I asked. I think we should meet her, Daniel said. Dad was right. She's our sister. Whether we knew about her or not, it's not her fault any of this happened. Mom nodded slowly. I've been writing her emails. Started a few months ago. She's a marine biologist in Seattle, studies ocean ecosystems. She's accomplished, has a good life. Your father would have been proud. Something about hearing Mom talk about Rebecca with acceptance, even pride, made me feel better. If Mom could move past the hurt and anger, maybe the rest of us could figure this out too. Over the rest of the weekend, we looked at photos Daniel had collected. Pictures of Rebecca as a baby, as a teenager, as an adult. We read emails she'd sent, getting to know her through her words. She wrote thoughtfully, with touches of humor that reminded me of Dad. We found pictures of Dad holding baby Rebecca, his face showing the same expression he'd had in photos with me and Daniel. Love, fear, wonder all mixed together. These weren't the photos of someone who didn't care. They were photos of a father who cared very much but had convinced himself staying away was the right thing to do. Do you think he was wrong? I asked Daniel late Saturday night. We were sitting on the back porch looking at the stars like we'd done as kids. I don't know, Daniel admitted. Maybe. But I also think he was trying his best with a complicated situation. Rebecca's mom had strong feelings about how she wanted to raise her daughter. Dad respected that. Is that wrong? I can't judge, but he should have told Mom. He should have told us, yeah, probably. But people are complicated. We make mistakes. We keep secrets we shouldn't keep. Doesn't mean we're terrible people, just means we're human. Sunday morning, I drafted an email to Rebecca, deleted it, started over, deleted it again, Finally, on the third try, I kept it simple. Hi, Rebecca. I'm your brother. That's a weird sentence to write, but it's true. I've spent this weekend learning about you, about our dad, about all the things that were kept hidden. I don't have any big speeches or profound thoughts. I just wanted to say that I'd like to meet you if you're open to it. No pressure, no expectations. Just one person wanting to know another person who happens to share their blood. Whatever you decide, I hope you're well. I sent it before I could overthink it anymore. Her response came that night. Short but warm. Hi. Thank you for writing. This is strange for me too. I've known about you and Daniel my whole life. Watched from a distance as you lived yours. Part of me always wondered if we'd ever actually talk. I'd like to meet too. But I should probably tell you something first. Something Dad told me when he visited me. Something about why he made the choices he did. I think you and Daniel should hear it. Can we set up a video call? I showed the email to Daniel and Mom. We agreed to a video call the following week, all of us together. It felt right doing this as a family. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom, I thought about Victoria. I pulled out my phone and sent her a text. Thank you for telling me. You were right. Everything changed. But I think it's going to be okay. Her response came a few minutes later. I'm glad. You're braver than you think. Your dad would be proud of how you're handling this. Maybe she was right. Maybe this whole situation, as messy and complicated as it was, could actually turn into something good. Maybe family wasn't about perfection or never making mistakes. Maybe it was about showing up even when things were hard, and choosing connection over comfort. I fell asleep thinking about meeting Rebecca, wondering what she'd be like in person, whether we'd have anything in common beyond genetics. The anticipation was back, but different this time. Not the terrifying kind that makes you want to run. The hopeful kind that makes you want to lean in. The video call was scheduled for the following Thursday at 7 p.m. Daniel drove up from his place, and we all gathered around Mom's laptop in the kitchen. The three of us sat there staring at the screen, waiting for the call to connect. Nobody saying much. When Rebecca's face appeared on the screen, the first thing I noticed was how much she looked like Dad. Same dark curly hair, same shape to her eyes, same slight smile that looked like she was always in on a private joke. But she had features that were uniquely her own too. Probably from her mother. Hi, she said. And even her voice had a familiar quality to it. Something in the tone that reminded me of family gatherings and old memories. Hi, we all said back, and then laughed nervously because we'd said it in unison. The first few minutes were awkward in the way these things always are. Small talk about weather, work, the logistics of living in different cities. But gradually, the conversation found its rhythm. Rebecca told us about her work studying ocean ecosystems, how she'd always been fascinated by water and living things. Mom mentioned that Dad had loved fishing, spent hours by the lake when he could. Rebecca smiled at that. He told me that when he visited. Said he wished we could have gone fishing together. Why didn't he? Daniel asked, not accusatory, just curious. When he visited you, I mean. Why just one visit? Rebecca's expression grew more serious. That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about. Dad told me things during that visit. Things about his past, about why he made the choices he did. I think you should know. She took a breath, gathering her thoughts. Dad struggled with addiction when he was younger. Alcohol mainly. This was before he met your mom. Back when he was with mine. He got sober, worked hard at it, but it was a daily battle for years. This was news to us. I'd never seen Dad drink much. Maybe a beer at barbecues, nothing excessive. I'd always thought he just wasn't interested in alcohol. When my mom got pregnant, Rebecca continued, she was scared. Dad was still early in his sobriety, still figuring things out. She loved him, but she wasn't sure he was stable enough to be fully in a child's life. She didn't want me growing up around the kind of chaos addiction can bring. Mom reached over and took my hand. I could see this was hard for her to hear, learning about a part of Dad's life he'd never shared. So they made an agreement, Rebecca said. Dad would stay sober, get himself together, support us financially, but keep his distance until he was sure he could be consistently present. By the time he was really stable, years had passed. My mom and I had our own life, our own routine. Dad thought disrupting that would be selfish. But he still could have told us, I said. Later, I mean. When he was stable? I think he was ashamed, Rebecca said softly. Not of me, but of the situation. Of his past struggles. Your mom didn't know about his addiction issues when they met, right? Mom shook her head. He told me he didn't drink much, but I never knew why. I just thought it was a preference. He built a new life, Rebecca explained. A fresh start. Telling you would have meant revealing everything. The addiction, the failed relationship, the daughter he'd kept at a distance. I think he convinced himself it was better to just let the past stay in the past. That's a lot to carry alone, Daniel said. It was. When my mom died, Dad reached out, said he wanted to explain everything, to apologize for being absent. We talked for hours. He cried, told me how much he regretted his choices. But he also said his time with your mom, with you two, had saved his life, that his second chance at family was the thing that kept him sober and healthy. That hit me hard. The father I knew, the stable, reliable man who coached Daniel's little league and helped me with homework and never missed a school event, had built that life on top of struggles I'd never known about. He wanted to tell you, Rebecca said, looking directly at the camera, especially near the end. But he was sick and scared and worried about causing pain. The letters were his compromise. A way to tell the truth after he was gone, when maybe the truth would hurt less. We talked for almost 2 hours. Rebecca told us about growing up knowing about her brothers, about checking our social media, about feeling both connected and separate. She told us about her mom, Patricia, who'd been a nurse and died from a sudden heart attack, about how she'd grieved alone, knowing Dad was still alive but not feeling like she could reach out. I sent flowers to his funeral, she said, signed them from a friend. I watched from my car in the parking lot, saw you all go in. I wanted so badly to join you, but I didn't think I had the right. You did, Mom said firmly. You had every right. You were his daughter. Rebecca's eyes got shiny. Thank you for saying that. Before we ended the call, we made plans to meet in person. We decided on Portland, a neutral city none of us lived in 3 weeks' time. We'd spend a weekend together, no pressure, just getting to know each other. After the call ended, the three of us sat in silence for a while. I'm angry at him, I finally said, for keeping secrets, but I also understand why he did it. Life is messy, Mom said. People are messy. Your father wasn't perfect, but he loved his family, all of his family, and he tried his best with an impossible situation. Do you think we can really do this? Daniel asked. Be a family with her? I think we can try, I said. That's all any family does, right? Try. Over the next 3 weeks, we exchanged emails and texts with Rebecca. Nothing heavy, just small glimpses into daily life. She'd send pictures of her work, interesting sea creatures she was studying. I'd send her pictures of my terrible attempts at cooking. Daniel shared stories about his students. It felt natural, easy in a way I hadn't expected. Like we were building a relationship that had always been waiting to exist. I stayed in touch with Victoria too. She checked in regularly, asking how things were going, offering encouragement. Our friendship had deepened through all this, built on the foundation of her honesty and courage in telling me the truth. You did a good thing, I told her during one of our coffee meetups. Telling me that night, it would have been easier to stay quiet, to let the law firm handle everything officially, but you didn't. I've been thinking a lot about truth, Victoria said. How we tell it, when we tell it, why we tell it. Your dad kept secrets because he thought it was kinder, but secrets have weight. They change shape in the dark. Maybe the truth hurts in the moment, but at least it doesn't grow into something bigger. You sound like a philosopher. I sound like someone whose dad left without explaining why, she said with a sad smile. I spent years making up stories about it, filling in the blanks with my imagination. If he'd just told us the truth, even if it